Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Reed. I'm the CEO of the Aga Khan Foundation in the UK and its Global Director of Partnerships. It's my pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon. This is an intrepid group. You've almost made it through to the end of the Paris Peace Forum in 2025, but we have an exciting panel for you to give you a bit of energy to end the day, called Empowering Youth to Lead Peacebuilding, Social Change, and Cohesion. And so I want to introduce our panelists and jump straight into what they're doing. So we've got Mohammed Adam with the Youth and Environment Society from Sudan. We have Dagu David Justin Gamunde from the Whitaker Peace and Development Institute in South Sudan. We have Dr. Angie Yoder Maina with the Green String Network in Kenya. The two here on my immediate right are finalists for this year, and Angie's organization is long-standing, finalist in the past, has been in the Scale Up Network, et cetera. So we really have the best of the best, I guess I would say. But I would also say that you have an example of what the Paris Peace Forum can do concretely in the world. Now, the premise of the session is that, as I suppose you will have heard in almost every session, that we're right now in a world of increasing conflict, where it seems like parts of the multilateral system are breaking down or aren't working well enough. It seems like the geopolitical tectonic plates are shifting, and there's a lot of pessimism in the world. Is that fair to say? But I think what's important, actually, and you've probably heard that at many panels starting out, something like that, either here or at the UN General Assembly or elsewhere. But what's important about this panel, and I think the Peace Forum, is that actually there are many, many people, despite that backdrop, doing work on the ground and making a difference. And so what we want to get into today is the kind of work that they're each doing in their contexts, what is working, and why it's important to have young people involved. So Mohammed, if I can start with you, and I'm going to go to each of you in turn, but please tell us a little bit about the situation in Sudan, in your instance, what your organization is doing and trying to do and how it's working, because then that'll set the stage and then we can start a bit of a discussion from there.
Okay, thank you. I want to take the first moment here to request all of you to stand for a moment of solidarity with Sudan and what's going on now in Darfur region, North Darfur state, and North Kordofan state. Almost 20,000 people have been wiped out during the last week. More than 20 million have been displaced cross-border and within the country. Like most of the people, the young people are suffering inside and outside the Sudan, including women, indigenous, and also youth. So let's dedicate this 1 minute of solidarity with Sudan. And please, parlez du Soudan. Thank you so much. You can have a seat. Thank you so much, Matt, for the introduction. Our organization, the Youth and Environment Society, we are working in Sudan, in most of the regions that currently receiving and experiencing conflict on a different stages. But our project currently presenting for this year forum is called Youth Alliance for Local Adaptation and Peace, YALAP. We have created this global network which have been operating for in 27 countries that is most impacted by climate change, but also experience some degree of instability or active conflict. In Africa, we are working in Sudan, Chad, Senegal, South Sudan, and also some of the countries in the MENA region, including Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, and also some of the Asian countries, including Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and also moved to some of the Latin American countries, including Colombia. So the situation is in all these countries is sharing the same context, like the active conflict, creating a resource scarcity for the people inside the countries, which lead to amplification of climate change impacts, while also the climate change itself driven some kind of resource scarcity that lead to competition over the resources, like the very little resources we have in these countries that create by social tension and some fragmentation within the social cohesions we have that leads to some kind of tension and also active conflict. And this situation have been unfolded in many ways, particularly the first conflict that has been declared climate-driven was in Darfur in 2004, but move on to this conflict that we're currently experiencing is that most of the time they said the Lake of Chad had been dropped or driven drought, and this will lead to some of the hindersmen and the pastoralists coming to the world of the lands of the farmers, which lead to competition over these lands, in which those groups have different groups and arm affiliation, which supported by different actors, including national and regional actors. This is a situation in Sudan and also for most of the countries that we are working on with the ALA project that we have.
Great. Well, why don't I'm tempted to ask questions, but I think if I start doing that, then we won't get to the other two. But I think what you've put into really stark relief is obviously how immediate these challenges are, despite being linked to extremely long-term trends. And I think that's something we'll come back to in the other, with the other panelists. So Dagu, please tell us a bit about your context and the work you're doing.
Thank you very much, moderator. I would like to, first of all, recognize the presence of everyone here. To begin with, I am very happy on behalf of WPDI, or Whitaker Peace and Development Initiative, thank the Paris Peace Forum for giving us this platform to showcase what we do in South Sudan with the Whitaker Peace and Development Initiative. In South Sudan, we run a flagship program known as the Youth Peacemaker Network. And the Youth Peacemaker Network, first of all, Whitaker Peace and Development Initiative is a non-governmental organization that is founded by Mr. Forrest Whitaker. And Mr. Forrest Whitaker thought of founding this organization to support young people, empower young people with skills that, especially in places that are coming out of conflict, to be able to be catalyst for change and transformation in their community. As Mr. Adam is saying, our context is quite complex. We are coming from a region that is geopolitically tense, with a lot of conflict and with a lot of issues. And when you look at South Sudan, we are surrounded right now, apart from the complexities of the conflict that already the country has endured for so many years, we are surrounded by countries that are already now in active wars. DRC in the south, we have Sudan in the north, and when you look at Sudan used to be the lifeline of South Sudan in terms of how the economy moves and how the people thrive and so on. But with the conflict there, that link has been cut due to destruction of pipeline, due to displacements of people and so on, and nothing can happen. And therefore, this has now exacerbated the challenges that South Sudan is already facing. And apart from that, South Sudan already after independence, just 2 years after independence, endured a civil war in 2013, and 2 years later in 2016, another war in which, when you look at the toll of those conflicts, successive conflicts, is massive. We're talking about here we are talking about internally displaced people to the tune of 2.3. And again, refugees in the neighboring country, about 2.4. So when you look at that, our context of our work, and this is where now the YPN program comes in. Young people have been disenfranchised and lost hope, and with this, our YPN program comes in to elevate their engagement in the let me say, in the elevation of the situation that the country is facing and to bring about hope. And with this, we formulated an arrangement that contextualize their situation and train them to be able to be partners in developing their communities and in bringing about peace and so on. So this is where we are, and this is where we premise our program in South Sudan. Thank you.
Very good. We'll come back to dig a little bit deeper into that in just a second. Angie, if you could please tell us, set the stage for us for your work.
Sure. Listening to Mohammed and Dagu, the work that Green String Network is doing is actually doing work around social healing. And what we've just heard from both of them, and we've worked in the South Sudan, we've worked in Somalia, we've worked with Sudanese who are now mostly in the exile, in the diaspora now. But we've also worked in Kenya. And in Kenya, we're really working with young people. And we talk a lot about healing-centered peace building and its way it links to mental health. And the mental health, not just in our conflict zones, is increasing with young people. It's increasing here in France. It's increasing in the US. It's increasing globally. A few weeks ago, my colleague Mary, who's here in the room, who's the suicidologist of Kenya, gets a call. There's 2 young people in crisis. We don't know what to do. Hospitals couldn't help. The police couldn't help. No one could help. And they didn't survive. And this is the problem. We're leaving young people to be alone in crisis. And that's in Sudan. That's in South Sudan. That's in Kenya. That's in France. That's everywhere. And that's what we're really trying to work on, is that the mental health that we're dealing with is around the context that surrounds all of us. We've just stood and felt what the pain means in Darfur. And you can only understand that that's how young people are living their lives. And so this work isn't about creating better services. We keep saying that's what mental health should do: more hospitals, more beds, more psychiatrists, more therapists. But you know what? In our context, they don't come. They're left alone. So who's going to go? And so what's the question? How do we keep people from being alone in crisis? We turn to our neighbors, we turn to our friends, we turn to those who are in our vicinity. The counter to that, for the last 10 years, we've been running this program in East Africa, in Kenya on the coast. When we first came in 2018 to the Paris Peace Forum, we came with the Mombasa County government. In Mombasa, today, when there's a crisis, you know who they call? They call our community circle keepers, who go to the house, who make sure they're not alone. Those young people are surviving. That's how we scale mental health, whether it's here in East Africa, or I think also whether it's here in Europe, in the US, or anywhere. How do we start asking a question that doesn't leave people alone in their distress? Because the world today, it's distressful.
So I want to come back actually to you, Mohammed, because Angie has just talked about addressing the needs of young people in need, in stark need. But you also were talking about getting them active in addressing the causes of the conflict. So tell us a little bit about how you're doing that, exactly how you're getting them involved and where that's leading.
Okay, thank you. I think the young people themselves, and I mean particularly those are in active conflict zone areas or experiencing some degree of conflict, they are taking the burden of everything. They are the victims of conflict, but they are responsible for rebuilding their countries, they're rebuilding their lives, and also to have to be like an active agents. I have a conversation with my colleagues this morning, and we just discussed how we're going to be like an active agents, when we are suffering and struggling to survive even. And this leads us to like the work that we are doing 2 years ago, when we actually like work with young people in Sudan, and also with the countries that I have mentioned earlier, with the ALAB organization, the ALAB network. Most of the time, like we set like a base in which we listen to the young people first, rather than like providing them with the information that they need to act. So we have done like a global study to ask the young people about the context that they live in, the needs and the challenges that they face. In Sudan, we have conducted this in 2023 with the launch of survey that have been participating almost like 2,500, sorry. And we were shocked actually with the result of the survey, because these times where the conflict at its peak, the young people said the resources needed are education. And then after that, they need to stop the war. The third thing was food and shelter. But the first assumption that we have put, and also most of the humanitarian, international, multilateral organization, when they think they want to intervene in such countries, they just design a program that like the donor want or the organization itself is mandated, which is really need to be shifted down. Because the young people themselves, the people who are in the middle of everything, they're supposed to decide what the best for them and how they want to get out of this. Moreover, we have also like do a survey in which involve like 20 countries out of the 27 countries we have in ELAB. And most of the time when we like talk about the barriers or the challenges, they talk about how they supposed to be represented when they don't have access to visa, when they don't have like the finance to come to the forums or to speak about their things, the work that they're doing on the ground. Also, one of the things that Angie mentioned is the trauma healing and the mental health. Most of the time, this is a privilege that when you just come into the people and say we want to design a program that focuses on the mental health. These people are struggling for shelter and food. How come? And then after a few years, we just found a generation, like a complete generation, suffer from trauma. And like most of the studies that I have read about this topic, like most of the people who have experienced like conflict or they have been going through trauma are the one actually get involved in violence in the future. And this has been a fact for most of the countries involved in this such of the context. We were trying to do this by listening to the young people, sitting on the ground, doing a research, understand their like actual needs, and then design programs, creating an inner circles from which we can exchange, like doing a peer-to-peer exchange. And actually we have a very nice example that we have done last year in which we have some groups from Syria and Yemen who have done some exchange with people, and youth group from Sudan. And we have advocate for this group on the HCCT. It's the humanitarian coordination team that is led by OCHA in Sudan. So the groups from Yemen and Syria said that when their conflict has been like coming down, when this area has been like some kind of stable, some of the young groups have been like recruited into some of the armed group because the conflict has somehow stopped and the people were trying to survive, but there is no job. There is no livelihood. So they just recruited them in order for them to get paid or to have money. And what they have done, like most of the INGOs, they were trying to provide humanitarian assistance. And these people, they don't care about humanitarian assistance because they want life, they want work, they want to restore their livelihood. So what we have done with the HCCT and the OCHA team, we said that these people are struggling. We have people in Khartoum state, which has been liberated by the army. We have some of the people in the eastern and the northern part of Sudan who have been recruited for 500,000 SDG to get into an armed group and to fight on the front lines, which are they represent almost like half of the population in Sudan. And this is the case for most of the countries. Almost 40% of the population are youth, are young people. And if these young people, they don't find an opportunities, they will just go, wherever they go. So what we have done, we ask for them to design, instead of like a silo humanitarian program or humanitarian intervention, is to include some of the FSL, Food Security and Livelihood Program, in which they have like a cash for work program that is designed specifically for the young people, in which they will engage in some of the activities within the program, including waste management, waste collection, rebuilding of some of the areas that has been destructed by the war. And at the end of the activities, they get paid for this work. So what's happening? Like 2 months after the implementation of the program, from 50 persons that has been involved in the project, we have almost 200. Which is almost like three triples have been doubled throughout the process. So this is one of the areas that we really need to focus on, especially when we are talking about the young people in climate-affected or climate-impacted regions, young people in climate conflict-affected regions. Thank you so much.
Well, I want to pick up on, thank you for that, and I want to pick up on a couple of things you said. I think that the one thing that goes back a little bit to what Angie was saying is, first of all, listening. I mean, it shouldn't sound as that innovative that you go in and ask young people what they need, but you'd be surprised in how many humanitarian contexts that doesn't happen, just as a regular course of designing programs. It's certainly one of the things that we've experienced when we've had to engage with the kind of humanitarian bureaucracy, if I can put it that way, in different countries like Afghanistan and Syria, et cetera. So that really resonates. So number one is listening, and just I would say maybe the agency that comes through being listened to is really important. That strikes me. But the second one that you said, which I think is really important, is the desire for education and opportunity. Something that's future-oriented. And we might come back to that in a second, because I think it might be interesting for us to focus a little bit on this aspect of thinking beyond the conflict and trying to think about how you construct in the middle of a destructive situation. And so, Dago, I want to come to you, because that's precisely what you all are doing. You're trying to build skills for people so that they can have some control over their own lives in the midst of this. Tell us more about how you're doing it, what you're doing, and what they are doing, perhaps more importantly, through the program and the kind of skills that they're learning.
All right, thank you very much. So the beauty of the Youth Peacemaker Network program is this. We work by contextualizing our intervention based on the communities and the places that we go to. So our program is unique in line with the needs of the community where we go with this intervention. And this all goes and feeds to our overall goal of youth empowerment and community development. As I said earlier, South Sudan has gone through decades of civil war before attaining the independence, which means that successive generations of young people miss formal education. That means it's a big challenge for the country to get these young people into the labor market, to produce, and to move things forward. And this is where our program comes in. Try to bridge this gap by skilling these young people and to ensure that they feed into the job labor market, but also to be actively engaged in their communities with work and actively mapping out what the issues are and bringing in and drawing out intervention through our guidance. But here, this is how we do it. The YPN program has designed 4 key pillars that we work around. The first one is peacebuilding. Under the peacebuilding pillar, we train young people, especially young leaders from the communities that we work in conflict resolution education, conflict management, and so on. So they go into their communities and replicate this, cascading it down to the grassroots level. At the second level is your local youth, which then multiply our workforce with these young people threefold or fivefold. Here then, we with the youth leaders, together with the local youth, go down to the community, which is our sphere of concern, and this is where the issues are. And these young people then use these skills to map out issues in the various communities and then rank them based on the most pressing. And here then they formulate intervention, and it can be anything. It can be probably employment issues, unemployment affecting young people. Therefore, as a result, then they get recruited into militia, into doing deviant things, and so on. So they intervene, they formulate intervention that then mitigate that and engage these young people to become active members rather than being misused in that manner. But it can also be food insecurity. So what do they do with food insecurity? They then come up with agriculture program, agro program, even forestry, reforestation, and so on. And this then keep these young people plus community members active and creating employment for them. And in the process, then they develop their community, bring about local services there. And as you know, we normally work in some of the communities we work in are places that are cut off from mainstream services. So you can imagine no schools and so on. So with the engagement that we do, these people are able to do outreaches, prevent intercommunal conflict by organizing or convening community dialogues and so on. And these are through the intensive training in conflict resolution and so on. That's the first pillar. The second pillar we do is business and entrepreneurship program. So we also train that, and this is to connect the conflict resolution education that we have given them with livelihood engagement. This is translating knowledge and the skills that they've received from this training, translating it into practical aspects of things so that then they can begin to reap peace dividend. And the peace dividend is the work and so on that they do. So this is connecting this in this kind of nexus. And then the third one is health and well-being, which our sister here is doing, and this is trauma healing and so on. So without this, you cannot have peace, because when somebody's troubled, having something a lot in their heart, it's very, very difficult to focus on anything else. And then the last pillar is sports. We use sports as a platform or as a conduit to reach out with peace messages and bringing into community together. And this is, for us, creates social cohesion. So with that, we have multi-pronged approach that brings about young people harnessing their energies and so on to be able to do that. And we're talking about a population of about estimated 15 million, of which 70% are young people below the age of 35. And if you leave them just moving about and not doing anything meaningful, you can imagine. So there are there's proliferation of armed groups and all of that in the country. As a result, most of them find themselves recruited there and causing harm to their community rather than good. So Withika Peace and Development Initiative through the YPN program has been bridging this gap, and so many of these young people, after being engaged, have been involved in creating so many other initiatives in the community, and others through the training that they've received have been able to then go further and attain education. For instance, they become interested in the area of peace building and so on, then they go further and enroll, and this becomes then multiplying for us and creating the mindset change that we have been looking for. So thank you.
Well, I would be remiss of saying I love this idea of a youth elder. Actually, can I be one of those? I don't know if I count, but no. But I also, what I like about that idea is that there's wisdom in youth, right? I mean, that's really what you're talking about, and that there's wisdom in the kinds of conversations, discussions, and work that they're doing. And I think that, for me, that's one of the things that's coming out and is really important that we should come back to a little bit. Angie, I think, Dagu just talked about at the very end this very, very important work that they're doing about, again, listening to each other and trying to provide some of that healing while they're also trying to provide a way forward. Tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing, how that's working, how you interact with, say, the humanitarian bureaucracy, for example, and how you're sort of getting through to implement and build these programs when, in fact, the system isn't really made for these sorts of things to happen and emerge.
So I was working in South Sudan in 2006, right after the CPA, and worked with USAID. I had a budget of $80 million. We built peace dividends and community centers and roads and you name it. And it was a very hopeful time. But I remember with the listening that we were doing and in the communities, I left that program and like my handover notes to USAID, 85% of it was, look, if we don't engage today on the pain that exists, even with all this hope, because that was the hopeful time, there will be conflict. It's not if, it's when. And 2013, 2014, today, that win has come, and South Sudan is still in a turmoil, and those $80 million were long forgotten. And if we'd only taken time at that hopeful time and spent, a fraction of that, putting people in circles, going through the churches, through the social networks that already existed, and gave people a space to talk about what had happened, and not just what had happened in the last few years, what had happened for generations. So our work has been creating that, and it's always a co-creation process. I'm not a psychologist, I'm a peacebuilding practitioner, and I remember early on the psychologist out there from the West used to say, you can't do that. You're going to re-traumatize these people. And I kept thinking, who are these people? These people are the people who are telling us stories and asking us to draw paintings that were reflecting their lives, their hurts, their pain, their joys. And the humanitarian said, no, you have to do psychological first aid and you have to remain very distant and you can't. And I said, but who are you? You're nowhere near the village. You're nowhere in the space where you have to actually allow people to own their own healing and to take it forward. And this is where we've started a program of training what we call resource facilitators who use our material, and our material is very visual. We were realizing we had to do visual. So we have watercolor paintings. We have almost 1,500 watercolor paintings from the region showing people's stories of pain and hurt and joy and celebration and breaking free of this. And in that, everybody looks at a painting, and when Dagu and I look at the same painting, we see the two different stories based on our life experience. So telling this story is a safe way to say, hey, in this story, I see Ahmed doing da-da-da-da-da, and I don't have to say, well, actually, that's me, or that's you, and all of a sudden the story layers on each other, and the story becomes this beautiful way of starting to say, hey, that happened to me. That's me in the picture. I'm like that. And so our healing circles, while they may formally go 12 weeks, there's healing circles that started in the coast of Kenya from 2017 who still, they don't meet every week, but they're all in a WhatsApp group. They're all meeting once a month at least. They're doing their chama, I don't know, their rotating savings group every month. And they have 12 to 15 people that they can call at any one time when they're in crisis. And that, to me, is how we're going to eventually be able, in these polycrises, so you have climate, you have civil unrest, you have domestic violence and abuse. All of these things are part of the polycrisis that exists. But when you go to the humanitarian organizations as a small Kenyan NGO, they don't want to see us. They don't want to, in fact, they're like, why are you even there? You're not even a psychologist. You're not a mental health person. You're going to hurt these people. There's re-traumatization always comes. And I know, have got my doctorate. I can tell you, no. This is people's stories. They're living a life that can re-traumatize them at any one point, but they're getting agency through this process. And once people own something, they resource it. So now in the coast, people are resourcing this. This isn't coming from outside. It doesn't matter whether the funding is there, and we've had a funding landscape change. So USAID was funding a lot of health programs in East Africa. That's gone. So governments are not going to fund expansion of mental health because it's growing in the region, but we don't need it because we actually already have the solution, and that solution is ourselves.
Well, I think, that resonates a lot with me, the work that we do at the Aga Khan Foundation. I was saying on a panel yesterday, a lot of the work that we do in Afghanistan is through women's savings groups that were formed 20 years ago. We have nothing to do with them. They don't need us to do that work. And so what you were just saying is what you're doing is you're creating groups of solidarity. And the groups themselves, and what I took away actually from what Mohammed and Dago were also saying is that these groups are going to exist to solve their own problems with or without funding from big humanitarian agencies and all the rest. Although I'm sure if I asked you what your challenge is, every one of you is going to say money. So I'm not going to ask you that question yet. But I'm going to give, because I want to give some people, and we have about 10 minutes left. And so before we do a last round, I did think I'd give some people in the audience the opportunity to ask questions if you would like. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, 5 is it. I don't know if we can get in 5 in 10 minutes, but let's try. Do we have a microphone for any of them? Can you, so there was a gentleman here, and then there was a woman next by, and then there's a young woman here, this gentleman, and this gentleman.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Peter Chol. I'm from South Sudan, and I'm really very privileged to be here. I'm doing my master's in international governance and diplomacy in Science Po. This is my first year. This conversation is really resonating with me, like the rest of you have said, because when the panelists were just discussing this, I was just sitting here and looking at all things, and this is the life that many of us as South Sudanese have gone through. So my questions, actually, I'm going to ask 2 questions, but let me take one so that I give a chance to other people. Looking at the context of South Sudan, then I'm happy that the question I'm going to ask is going to resonate with the 3 panelists, because I'm happy that Angelina also works in South Sudan. Looking at the context of South Sudan and Sudan, we have seen that over the years, South Sudan and Sudan have been going through the war. And all the peace processes that have been done, we've seen that youth have actually been excluded from the peace process. And we can give an example of all the peace processes that have been done in Sudan and South Sudan. And so my question is going to be, considering the nature of that, all that the politicians and the military elites have been taken over the peace processes, what are the practical procedures or the steps that you both have taken in South Sudan and Sudan to ensure that the youth are actually practically included in the process, but not just outside as a participant? Or let me put it this way, the youth have been put as architect of the peace processes, but not just as the participant. Thank you.
Excellent. So what I'm going to do is we're going to collect a few of these questions and then come back. So essentially the question is, how are youth being built into these macro peace processes, and what difference would that make? Please.
Yeah, okay. Hello, I'm going to ask a very quick question for Angie. It's mostly about art practices for healing. I was wondering if there is any difference in using art for healing practices versus other healing practices, especially as it relates to re-traumatization. Thank you.
All right, so we had someone here, I think, and then down here. No, ma'am, there was a woman here who had a, well, all right.
Alors, merci de m'avoir donné la parole, mais je vais faire un constat avec vous.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. This theme is about the youth. I think there's a majority of young people in this forum, but look at this room. There are very few young people that came to listen to this session. So I believe that young people don't necessarily take an interest in the matters that should matter to them. In the context of peace and in the context of Sudan, everything that happens without us is against us. There is a lot that can be done to raise awareness amongst young people, to help them to engage in peace processes, but also to be more engaged in politics, because what often happens is politicians make bad decisions that impact us all. We, as young people, should be way more involved and should be aware of the fact that we can contribute to the peace processes, but also to all the decision-making processes. I'm an MP in Senegal. We are a group of young people that decided to be involved. I'm also the president of the Commission on Defense and Security. This is why I'm here today. And we want to call to action the young people, especially young Africans, to really get involved in the decision-making processes and institutions, because we will then take matters into our own hand, and we will be able to make the decisions that are for us. So my question for you is, beyond empowering young people, this is a good thing already. It's important to empower them in entrepreneurship and business, but what is the message that we can send to those young people so that they can really get involved and that they can really become aware of the fact that they need to get involved in politics more?
Your view is that actually there aren't enough people involved in either politics or this kind of work, and that how do we get more of them engaged? If that's if I understood that correctly. We'll go here, and then we'll come back.
Hi, everyone. I know proselytizing when you ask a question is poor form, but I just wanted to say first to Dagu and to Adam, thank you so much for your vulnerability and for your words and for your presence here, especially given the difficulties in your countries. I think professionalism in the Western world often tells us that the head and the heart need to be separate, and peace building needs more people like you and more people like you in these spaces talking about the work that you do, and I wish this room was completely packed to the brim to hear you. So really, thank you so much for being here today. I work for a foundation that does peace building work. We fund local peace builders all over the world. And it's our belief that if more local peace builders were involved in peace building, we would have more effective solutions. And one of the problems in halls of power like this is we talk about bringing people to the table. We don't talk about what's wrong with the table. And what's wrong with the table is that local peace builders aren't there. So I wonder, this is a bit of an optimistic question, but if you look to a future where peace builders like yourselves had more power in designing peace processes, in deciding what solutions should look like, how do you think that would affect the outcomes? What do local voices do for peace building processes? Thank you.
So we have two questions about how to embed young people in peace building. We've got one question about how just to get young people engaged generally. We've got one about art and therapy, and we've got a last question here.
I was interested in the relationship between youth and the generation above within your own countries. We've talked a lot about youth and the outside, but there must be a lot of complexity and solutions within the country.
So intergenerational relations, and you have 2 minutes to answer all of that. Why don't we just go in order, if I could? And of course, Angie, you have to answer the one about art. I mean, unless either of you have views on art and therapy, but please, maybe you could start with the role of youth in formal peace processes.
Yeah, I think the point that have been mentioned by our colleague here is very important, because most of the time the youth are just a quota to be met, just to bring young people to the conferences or the peace processes. But I think the process, or how we get this shifted, it's come from the young people themselves. They need to be organized. They need to force and look for their rights, to be present, and also to have a decision-making process and decision-making power. We have some of the good success from Sudan currently, in which we have a group of youth that have been involved within the EU, AU, and the IGAD processes that is currently ongoing, within some consultation going on, in which the youth agenda has been surveyed throughout the country, just to have the agenda enforced within any future peace agreement that will be signed.
And you think that's effective? You're happy with that?
Yeah.
Excellent.
I think so.
I think from my understanding, I'm looking at the engagement of the creation of awareness through creation of platform at the local level, so that young people understand their role and stake in the processes that are going around them. So active civic engagement of young people is paramount for them to begin to understand the big picture. And for us, this is the kind of work we do. And we have also a network of community learning center, which are hubs of education. And here, this is how we engage them in different aspects of things. And sometimes we just bring them over to discuss what are the real issues affecting them locally in their community. And we invite policymakers, local leaders, and so on, so that some of these discussions then become policy framework engagement at the higher level. Then they see the voices of young people matter, and from there, that's where then we identify those that can then have stake at the table. So local engagement is very important for that.
And it sounds like that's also a bit of the intergenerational part, but maybe afterwards you all can have a discussion about the tensions and how well that discussion goes. Angie, last word on art and therapy.
You maybe not see, I do visuals with everything. And this visual starts with a center of we hurt. And when we hurt, we've lost our creativity. We're frozen, we're running away, we're fighting. We're actually in a trauma response. And there's no creativity, there's no innovation that comes. And this is one of the reasons in our practice that we're doing. The paintings and the storytelling is part of that art. It frees up, it allows people to begin to access what we call the we can and we are. And that place of collective, the collective nervous system shows joy and innovation. And that is this almost magical place that you can be in the worst of times and sit in that circle and sing this song together or hear this story and all cry together, and you walk out with the biggest smiles on your face. So art is one of those things. And this is why, programs across the world where schools are cutting art and these things, they're cutting out a lifeline of our humanity. So art is a big piece. The neuroscience tells us this there. It's connected into our nervous system and how we function as humans.
Yeah, just with regards to the intergenerational engagement, in our context, sometimes there's some cultural barrier that impedes the active engagement between the elders and the young ones, because there are instances where young people are seen as those that should be respecting the elders, which then blocks creation of platforms to engage. But in our program, we create this platform actively by involving community leaders for them to understand that young people have ideas that can propel the community forward. And we encourage this kind of interaction. And most of the time we have this sort of intergenerational engagement in which people then bring their point of view and you reconcile them. But also there are places where there's initiation processes of which young people take the helm of leadership of their community. So in this case, young people then do not listen to whatever elder people can say. So here also creates conflict between the two generations. And again, we try to create active platform to engage and reconcile the views. So there are certain impediments that create that, but always dialogue is the way forward to bring her forth.
Well, unfortunately, it's my job to stop the dialogue. But thank you all very much for the work that you're doing and for joining us today. If I can ask everyone to give them a round of applause, and thank you.